Hey guys, welcome back to the City Rev Live podcast. I'm Mandy, and here today I have Pastor Robey Barnes.
What's up?
What's up? Wow, that's very hip of you.
I'm just trying to stay up with the times, you know, Mandy?
I hear
what's up is a new phrase. I remember Bugs Bunny used to say it, and it's somehow come back around, so I'm just...
But I think what's happening is that...
What's happening is a phrase that's not as cool anymore.
No.
What's happening?
What's happening is that you're letting your Instagram post get to your head. Because for those of you that don't know, I have been working overtime to get
Instagram mogul
Robey
now.
Barnes back on the gram. And just yesterday, it's going to break the interwebs. Yesterday, he posted his first post in how long?
I literally think it's been 6 years, maybe 7.
6 years?
You
posted about Nehemiah.
There have been a few things, but I when Scarlett was born in 2013, I took a break from all social media and never went back. And there's been very little stuff in between then and now.
Wow.
And then I just, based on your social media tutelage over these years.
Tutelage?
Yeah, training.
What's that?
Training.
That's what tutelage means?
Yeah.
It sounds like a silly way to say training.
It's just, I'm trying to help you be hip, okay? I use the words what's
I don't
up?
think that's helping me, Robey.
And anyway, thanks to your social media training, I am now back on social media. with a bang. It was
with a bang, that's so great. Yeah, because it was scripture. So
I posted
what other
a verse.
Bang could you put, you know?
I posted a verse, I think 3 comments. And I don't think even people knew what to say. They're like...
From 0 to 3.
0 to 3, wow.
In one day.
That's why I say I'm a social media mogul now. Because I assume 3, it's been so many years. 3's good, right? 3 comments, that's good?
Yeah.
All right.
I think that my first, if I were to ghost social media for 6 years, I don't know, 3, I would feel like I won the Instagram lotto. So
I feel like I won.
Congrats on your Instagram conquest yesterday.
Thank you.
You were officially hip. So, yeah, I guess you can say what up. All right, all that just to say that before we roll into today's topic, it is not about Robey's social media. Go ahead and subscribe to City Rev Life podcast. That way, every new episode that rolls in, you are the first to know about it. So today, what we are going to be talking about, what we have been talking about, is this idea of rest and Sabbath. So what kind of brought this topic on?
Yeah, so we've been going through in this teaching series, The Provider. We've been talking about Exodus 15 and 16. We've been talking a lot about manna. And I know sometimes our heart is when we do a teaching series, we typically focus on one text, one part of the Bible. And it's just the Bible's so massive. When are we ever as a church going to go back to Exodus 16? I don't know who knows, maybe a couple years. So while we're in it, there's so often when I'm preaching or whoever's preaching, and we're going through a series, and there's other stuff in there that we don't get to. And so sometimes what I love about this podcast is it gives us opportunity to, mine some of this other stuff out and talk about some of it that we might not be able to talk about in the series. And so we've been talking about how God provides, but specifically I wanted to just draw out some stuff in here that is so applicable, so helpful, so practical about the idea of rest, the idea of sabbatical, taking time off. And I really feel like that's something that is relevant right now in the quarantine. I think it's relevant all the time. I don't know that as a culture we tend to rest well. And so I feel like it's always a helpful subject for us to think through.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, you hit the nail on the head. I think this is so prevalent, not just because of the time that we're in with the pandemic, but I also think with just living in America, where we just pride ourselves on so much productivity. Yeah. That rest is such a topic that we don't talk about enough, I think.
Yeah. So overworking, workaholism. Is one of those things that we actually wear like a badge. So someone wouldn't someone wouldn't necessarily wear, if there's something else that's completely out of whack in their life, they're not going to wear that as a badge. If they're like, man, I can't stop spending money. I'm addicted to shopping. I'm always in debt. Like, that's not something they're going to brag about. Like, that's something that they're going to want to work through. Well, but we do kind of brag about overworking. We're like, oh, I'm just so busy. It's my third week in a row working, 170 hours this week, which there's not even really that many hours in a week. But, we brag about it. Oh, I haven't taken a day off in 3 months. Oh, it must be nice that you went on a vacation because I don't have, I can't take vacation. Whatever it is, we kind of brag about it a little, and we wear overworking as a badge. And the Bible has a lot to say about that. So I think that's one of the things, is that our culture prizes overworking and doesn't prize rest and doesn't know what to do with the idea of rest.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
And so then when we do rest, a lot of times we feel guilty. It's hard then because of that, when you go to a rest part of your day or your week or your year, you feel like you're doing something wrong. You feel like you can't actually rest, which is actually not helping your work. And so taking rest is absolutely biblical. It's critical, and knowing letting the Bible set our minds on rest and work is absolutely vital, rather than our culture. Because our culture, there's some great things about our culture when it comes to hard work and productivity and innovation, but there's some things that are a little off kilter.
Yeah, that's really good. So what does, we talk about the Bible does talk about rest. What does it say about rest? What are some specific things that God would have us know about rest?
I think one of the biggest things is this idea of Sabbath, and I think that'd be really what's in this text and where we can start, is this idea of Sabbath. And there's a lot of questions, I think, that Christians have about the Sabbath, because it's actually one of the 10 commandments. I think it's the 4th commandment. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. In fact, in the law, it was a capital crime for breaking the Sabbath. Like, you would be executed, which is, that's like, whoa. Okay,
yeah, that's crazy.
That's a big deal. You would be, and there's actually an account of that in the Bible, honestly, in the book of Numbers. The Sabbath, keeping the Sabbath, was a huge, huge deal. It was a capital crime to break the Sabbath. And so a lot of Christians are like, whoa, time out. Like, how does that apply then to me as a Christian? Like, is this like the dietary laws that don't apply to me, or is this a law that does apply to me? Because does that mean that, like, I should be executed? Obviously, we wouldn't execute someone, but, like, does that mean like it's that big of a sin that I didn't take a day off? Yeah. Do I have to take Sunday off? Is it Saturday, like it is in the Old Testament? Is it Sunday like the New Testament? I think we have a lot of questions about the Sabbath, and part of it is it's wired into Genesis 1, the very first chapter. God works 6 days, rested the 7th. He's setting a paradigm and a precedent. Obviously, he doesn't need to rest because he's God. It's not like he's tired. He's setting a paradigm and a precedent. And so Sabbath is one of the things that's talked about. And Sabbath, we've got to unpack the idea of Sabbath if we're gonna walk through this kinds of stuff. So I think there's a lot of questions regarding Sabbath that it's helpful for us to understand.
Yeah, that's good. I think when one of the things that's so, I think, weird about what you just said was that God didn't need to take rest, but he purposely took rest, and that was just to illustrate to us how our life pattern should work.
Yeah, it literally is embedded into the fabric of creation. In other words, it starts off with the way the universe is designed to function is for periods of rest, work and rest, 6 days of work, and then he rested. And so let's just kind of walk through just Sabbath a little bit, and then I want to go into Exodus 16 and kind of look at it. But just a couple things. First of all, we approach the law as Christians very specifically. Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, I think it really helps us understand how we approach the law as Christians. Jesus says, I did not come to change the law. So Jesus does not come and say, hey, the law was silly. I don't know why, God was just, we're going to loosen the law. He says, I am not here to loosen the law at all. And why? Because God gave the law. The law was not Moses' ideas. It was God's ideas. God set the law. And so Jesus says, I have not come to change any of it, but he did come to fulfill it. So here's how we've got to think about it. Jesus perfectly fulfilled the Sabbath for us. So we as Christians are not bound to the idea of the Sabbath law because Jesus perfectly fulfilled the Sabbath law for us. So we don't look at Sabbath from a legalistic perspective. We now look at it from a wisdom perspective. This is how God wired us and wired creation. And what Jesus says about Sabbath is he says, man was not made for the Sabbath. Sabbath was made for man. So in other words, it's not that the Sabbath is so important that God is wanting humans to kind of be like, to bend and force themselves to obey some law because the Sabbath is more important. No, because God knows how he wired humans to need a Sabbath, he's given us this law, which is a gift. All of the laws we should see as a gift to us. Psalm 119, at some point, if you're listening or watching, go back and read Psalm 119 and see how the psalmist describes all of God's laws. He says they're incredible. It's like honey. It's like, he says one of his descriptions, it's like the sweetness of honey. All of God's laws are a gift to you. He's saying don't have an idol because that will mess up your life. An idol, if you make something and worship it, it's not going to protect you. It can do nothing for you, so don't have that. Don't murder, okay? That's not good, that's going to destroy your life. Honor your parents, because if you don't, that's going to destroy your life. And by the way, if you don't honor your parents, you're setting a bad precedent for your kids who are watching how you honor your parents, and that's how they're going to treat you. These are all for us. The Sabbath is for us. So as Christians, Jesus fulfilled the law for us. We're in Christ, so now we use the Sabbath because we understand how he wired us. It is for us. And so what do we know about the Sabbath? Two things. We use the Sabbath as an opportunity to rest and as an opportunity to worship. So I just wanted to start with just kind of framing this idea of, as a Christian, how do I approach the Sabbath? And I think we don't approach it rigidly and legalistically because, for starters, Sabbath doesn't have to be on Sunday. Many people worship on Saturday. I mean, as a pastor, Sunday's the day I work the hardest.
Yeah, that's true.
As a church staff person, weekends, if Sunday was my Sabbath, I would never have any rest. So my Sabbath is a different day of the week when I take off with my family and I set it aside for rest and for worship. So we don't approach it legalistically, but we do appreciate that God wired this for us, and we do honor it like that. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Yeah, that's good. I'm making all these mental notes. I'm like, man, this is really good. I feel like it's just such a timely, thing for us to be talking about, especially with this quarantine, because we are a culture that I think when we talk about rest and we think about when we're going to take rest, we do have so much guilt that is tied to that.
Yeah.
And I think in general we feel that way, and especially now during this time, it's like we're forced to not have options right now. Yeah. We're forced to be resting, and so we're forced into rest. Plus, we have this weird looming cloud of guilt. So it's encouraging to hear that it's not just like a suggestion that God gave, but it's like this is another way that you can worship me.
Yeah.
Is by taking time to rest. And not just empty your mind, because I think that's another thing too, is we in our day and age, we think rest is kind of like an emptying of the mind, and just trying to get still. But really it's an act of worship. What are you meditating on? What are things that you're allowing, to come in and kind of refresh your soul, and things that you have to be reminded of? And that's all part of rest.
Yeah.
So that's really good.
When we talk about worship, anything that we do can be turned into worship. So I remember I heard actually a seminary professor once was like, he was talking about this idea, and he said in the class, how many of you would feel comfortable mowing your lawns on a Sunday? And I'm like, and I raised my hand, and he looked at me like, how dare you? How dare you want to mow your lawn on Sunday? And he was approaching it very legalistically. And I humbly, hopefully said, well, I think there's some people that they actually, mowing their lawns is an enjoyable, worshipful activity. I mean, there's some people I know that love just watching row by row the grass get all uniform and perfectly cut and trimmed. And I mean, anything that turns into praise and thankfulness to God and enjoying his gifts, anything can be turned into an act of worship. I mean, obviously sin, breaking God's laws, is not worship. And actually anything could be turned into selfishness or excess. But by worship, it doesn't necessarily mean we spend the whole day in a prayer closet. Mm-hmm. It could mean someone goes out and kayaks and enjoys God's creation, or paints, and uses art, or and turns it into worship. I think there should be some scripture and some prayer and stuff like that, of course, but at some point throughout the day. But it's a day to rest and to worship the Lord, and so that's I think what the Sabbath in general is supposed to be. So yeah. But Exodus 16 talks. Let me just jump into that a little bit, Mandy,
sure.
unless you want to have any other thoughts on that before we continue. But Exodus 16, it's talking about manna, and if you haven't had a chance to hear, if you're watching, haven't had a chance to hear from the Provider series. You can check that out on our other City Rev sermon podcasts. We have those there. They're also on our website, cityrev.org. But on here, we're talking about God's people are in the wilderness. They've crossed the Red Sea. This is before they get to Mount Sinai. So that's actually interesting. It's before they get the law. And God is teaching them about Sabbath. And the way it works is they're hungry. They're providing manna. Manna is on the ground. And it describes it as let me just read it. I want to hear what
you described it last week in your sermon.
Yeah, I want to read this. I want you to tell me what comes to your mind. Okay, then I'll tell you what I think.
Okay.
Now the house of Israel. This is verse 31 of 16. Now the house of Israel called its name manna. It was like coriander seed, white, and the taste of it was like wafers made with honey. What do you think? I mean, what do you think?
So in my mind, this is how I think manna is like.
Okay.
So have you ever had baklava?
Yeah.
Do you know what baklava?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so I imagine manna to be not baklava because it has all the sugar and the nuts and stuff inside, but it's like the first layer of the baklava that's thin and it's crispy, but it's also kind of sweet.
Yes.
So that's what I'm imagining. And that's what I'm like. I mean, I hope they had that, because that's just delicious.
Baklava is, man, that is crazy. This is how it's described in Numbers. This is Numbers 11:7. Now the manna was like coriander seed. We got to figure out what coriander seed is because I have no idea what that is.
Does it say that it was
Yeah, it
grounded?
does. It does. Coriander seed, and its appearance like that of bdellium. The people went about and gathered it and ground it in hand mills and beat it in mortars and boiled it in pots and made cakes of it. And the taste was like that, like the taste of cakes baked with oil.
It didn't sound that sweet, actually.
That one there?
That one does not sound that sweet.
See, to me, but it tastes like honey. To me, I picture, and I actually said this in this last sermon, I picture a really soft, warm croissant, drizzled with
I think you're dreaming.
With honey. That to me, that'd be amazing. I love croissants. Anyway, the manna.
Speaking of croissants, yes, let's talk about rest and good things.
Exactly.
Just like croissants.
Which can be, eating a good croissant with honey drizzled on it can be an act of worship.
It totally is.
Doubt.
I thank Jesus every time that I have a croissant. So
Thank him.
It is.
So anyway, he's laying this manna down. They're supposed to go out and gather it for 6 days, every day. And it says, when the sun came out, it came down with the dew. When the sun came out and got hot, it melted, which is significant for this discussion we're going to have today. And then they're gathering it in for the day. And then on Friday, they gather twice as much so they can take the day off on Saturday. And on Saturday, it's not there, which all of that is miraculous. I mean, that means he's controlling the details of manna. And so what they do is they store some up the night before. They're supposed to store some up for the next day, and but the problem is when they do that any other night. So when they do that on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, if they store some to the next day, remember it says it stinks. It smells like rot, and it's got worms in it. and it just smells like it's rotting. I think it would smell like rotted meat, I think is the idea. It just smells terrible. And not just moldy bread, it's rotting. And so some of them don't, the first time, they don't store some up on Friday night because they don't want their tent to smell bad. So they're expecting to go out the next day. And what they're not trusting in is they're not trusting in God's provision that Friday night uniquely, he's going to make the extra they stored up not stink. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. So they're not trusting that God's going to provide. That is the first thing about rest I want to talk about. Rest is a trust step. It's faith. Because we often don't rest, we don't take a day off, because we are not trusting that the world can go on without us. And so the idea of taking our phone, or even like, and I'm not talking just the day off, but I'm talking like when you get home from work and it's time to spend with your family, or setting it aside to go spend time with God. Like sometimes I'll go on a prayer walk and I'll leave my phone at home. And at first I'm like, wait, but what if? And I'm like, there's literally nothing.
I have those same thoughts, yeah.
Yeah, that is this big of a deal, that for the next however long, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, I'll be fine. The world will be fine.
Yeah.
The world doesn't need me to stay connected. The world needs God to stay connected, and he is. But we don't rest often because we're not trusting God. And sometimes we have what we're trying to accomplish, and overworking and not taking rest is not trusting that it's safely in God's hands to provide. So we overwork, that's not God's plan, we don't rest, and it's a lack of faith in God's provision. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
That does make sense. It's actually bringing to mind, so a couple days ago, I had so many, we were having meetings, and I had so many thoughts of just different content ideas that we can be rolling out, you know, and I remember that I could not, that day I had just so many calls with people, so many conversations, so many ideas, and just creative ideas as well. And I could not turn my brain off. So this might have been like 10, 11 o'clock at night. I could not turn my brain off. I literally shut off all the lights in my room, and I was like ready to go to bed. I did like these breathing exercises. I'm like, I listened to this app that helps me to go to sleep. And I could not get this list out of my mind of things that I had to get done the next day. And for me, I know I'm such a list person, which is funny because a lot of creatives are not list people. I'm not that. I'm creative, but I'm also a list person, you know? And so I have to have everything there. I have to be able to like visually see that I've checked things off. And I'm sitting there and thinking of the things I have to do the next day. Yeah. And I think sometimes instead of writing those things down, what has been helpful for me and what's been worshipful for me is to say, okay, God, I'm not going to open my phone back up. I'm not going to write this thing down. I'm like, I am going to let me sit with that idea. I'm going to force myself to rest. And tomorrow, I trust that you'll help me to remember those things. And I know it sounds a little woo-woo. It sounds like, and then the Lord will speak to me, you know, at 8 o'clock in the morning when I wake up. But for me, that's an act of worship because I have found myself at midnight making lists, and then I'll be half asleep and I'll remember something else, and I'll wake up out of my rest and I'll write something down.
No, I think that doesn't sound woo-woo, was it?
Yeah, woo-woo? Like very like mystical and...
See, you're teaching me cool words now, you know? Like,
I told you, I'm cool.
Okay.
What was that word you said earlier?
Tutelage.
Tutelage.
Like a tutor. Like someone being tutored, that's...
It sounds like a dad that wears khakis, and he's like...
I am a dad.
Like, I don't know.
Has a braided belt.
I don't want to offend anybody.
Actually,
like, if they love the word tutelage, but it just feels like somebody's like... You're such a great tutelage. Like, I don't even know how to use that word, Robey.
It's a tutor, and you're under their tutelage.
So it's not a noun. It's not a person.
It is a noun, but it's a tutor tutors
We're so
a pupil,
off topic right now.
And the pupil is under that tutor's tutelage. That's how that works. And it's a very hip word.
It's okay. You don't have to continue. I'm not going to use it ever. So
I think.
But thank you for that.
I think it is not woo-woo what you're saying. I think that it is. It's what you're saying is. It's like you're releasing it's risky for you. So when you're saying like not putting it on the list, you're surrendering control. And I think that's great. And I think each one of us have to find, for me, when it comes to lists, when I put it on a list, that helps. For me, it's kind of the opposite. If I can put it on the list and I say, here, God, I'm writing this down and I'm sliding it to you. So you now, Lord, it's in your hands till tomorrow. And so one way or another, rest is a lack of faith. When we don't rest, when we overwork, it's because we think we're the ones providing for ourselves. So, and this can be like over the stretch of years and decades. Someone could be, maybe you work in the marketplace and your work-rest life is out of balance, and you're a workaholic, and you're not getting time to worship. You're like, I'm too busy to stop and pray, too busy to stop and read my devotions, too busy for my family, too busy for church. And we're just running around right now, and it's just my weekends are too busy to stop and go to church. Well, if you're overworking, it's because you think it's in your hands. Do you want what you can do, or do you want what God can do? And so surrendering our rhythm, there is a biblical rhythm of working and resting. And so it's an act of faith that God will provide. And you see that in this text because they have to trust that they store up enough manna for the next day and it's not going to rot and stink. They have to trust that it's in God's hand. And every single Friday when they gather double the amount on Friday of manna for the next day, Saturday, when they rest, they have to trust that God is going to preserve it. And when we stop and rest, you're having to trust that God's going to preserve your list.
Yeah.
Some people have to trust that God's going to preserve the fire station when they drive away, the police station, that their classroom, their students, their business, their branch, their department. They've got to. It's an act of faith. On the flip side, then, if it's an act of faith, it's also an act of humility. And I think God designed for us to need to rest. And I'm talking like He designed us to need sleep. If you don't sleep, literally, you eventually die. And so He's designed us to need to go unconscious, lay in the most vulnerable position where we have no control, like someone could sneak into our room or whatever. And, not to give someone who's watching nightmares, but like we go into this most vulnerable position every single day at night when we go to sleep. He is designed for us to need sleep and rest, and as a reminder that He doesn't sleep, but we do. So rest is an act of humility. It reminds me that I am not infinite. I am not God, and He rested in creation not because He needed to. I rest because I need to. So it's an act of faith. Rest is also an act of humility. Being a workaholic, not taking days off, not taking vacations, not resting and turning it off when you come home, not getting good sleep, ultimately comes down to pride.
Yeah.
And ultimately comes down to, I think it's all on my shoulders.
Yeah. One thing that we say around here, and I know because I've heard some of our leadership say this, like saying that you haven't taken your time off and saying that you haven't taken your vacation is not a badge. Like, you don't get a badge for that.
Right.
Like, if anything, according to everything we're talking about, if you are not taking that time to rest, if you're not taking that time to worship God in that way, it seems like you have your priorities off.
Right.
And you're actually not leaning on God, and you're actually not functioning to full capacity,
Absolutely. And so, a lot of times our church doesn't know how hard we work on our staff culture, but we work very hard on our staff culture. And we talk a lot about this. Our team runs very hard. One of our values is hustle. But at the same time, we value health, and we refuse to pick between the two. So people work hard. Working at a church is not the type of thing where you just punch out at 5 and nothing ever comes up. It's ministry. There's events to plan. There's people to minister to, and it's the best possible job and best possible thing I think you can do is working in a church. But we run hard. So we run hard, but we also make sure we rest, and we really hold people accountable to taking vacation, taking time off, taking sabbaticals, taking that kind of thing, because we run hard and we rest hard, so to speak. And so the balance of that, speaking of hustle, the balance of that is rest is not mean laziness. And I think that's an important balance, because there's some people that their struggle is going to be workaholism, and there's some people where their struggle is going to be laziness or apathy. And God promotes both of them. And he promotes both, he promotes both working hard and rest. Look at how this is wired here in Exodus 16. They had to go out every day and gather it. I love that God, for all that he did do with the manna, he didn't prepackage it for them. He didn't just say, hey, every morning at the door of your tent, I have preserved a 1 omer, which is the way they measure it's about a half gallon, 1 omer per person. He has the exact right amount of manna on the ground wherever they're at in the Sinai Peninsula it's what it says. Everyone had exactly how much they needed. It's nothing for God to take it one next step and have it all prepackaged right outside their tent. They had to go out every day and gather it for their family.
Right.
And not only did they have to gather it every day for their family, by the time the sun grew hot, it was melted. So they had to get up early.
Yeah.
Right? So they had to go out and gather it. And if they slept in and waited till 10 a.m. or however, 9:30 or whenever it was, it's not out, it's melted.
Yeah, which shows God's, how he requires work. Like he says work is good.
Yeah. Exactly. So before the fall in the garden, Adam is given work. He's a gardener.
Yeah.
Work is not bad. What the fall did when they sinned is it made work difficult, frustrating, and challenging. Work is wonderful and fulfilling. Mm-hmm. When we get to heaven, I think we'll have wonderfully fulfilling work to do. It'll be amazing. And so he wants them to work hard. They've got to work consistently. They've got to work every single day. They've got to get up early. They've got to gather it for their family, and they've got to collect it. There is work that they have to do. And I think the other reason they couldn't store it up, they couldn't gather double on Monday for Tuesday. Like, you know what? I want to sleep in on Tuesday. Let's gather double on Monday so we don't have to go out on Tuesday. Yeah. God didn't work like that. That only worked on Friday, preparing for the Sabbath. And so what we've got to see is part of understanding rest does not mean laziness. The Bible never condones laziness. The Bible talks about, especially through Proverbs, that it is a godly Christian thing to have a strong work ethic, to be diligent, to be hardworking, take pride in what we do, to do things with excellence. And so one of the things that does not honor God is laziness and calling it rest. Mm-hmm. And so that's the balance. We are called to work hard, and we're called to rest. In that, and to make sure that we're not using rest as an excuse for laziness.
Yeah. I'm thinking, too, is that sometimes it's hard for us to go from 0 to 60 in the sense of and I'm kind of saying that backwards, 60 to 0, really, where you're hard at work, you're hustling, it's good, it's healthy, and then that, okay, later tonight, I have to rest, or tomorrow's going to be my Sabbath, my rest time. Would you say that there's any, preparation that you would kind of put in place to help your mind and your heart and your soul get ready for a Sabbath? I think
that is exactly right, Mandy. I think thinking in those terms, I think we should have such a high value for rest that we prepare for it. So a couple things, and that's also biblical, because think about how it's in here in Exodus 16. He easily could have made the manna work differently. It satisfied them. The manna satisfied each person regardless of their metabolism or appetite. So that's a miracle. He knows every single person, and for 40 years. So there's a child that was satisfied by an omer of manna, and then when they became a teenager and their bodies were growing, it still satisfied them, and then when they're an adult, it still satisfied them. So he's doing a miracle with the manna. He could have just as easily said, hey, what you're going to do is you're going to eat Friday's manna, and it will satisfy you through the next day. Right? That's be the same miracle. You could just take it that step further. Yeah. But he didn't wire it like that. He said, no, I want you to gather double, and I'm going to do a different miracle than on Friday. I'm going to keep it from spoiling, and it'll be just as fresh on Saturday. So what they had to do is they had to prepare to rest. And that carried all the way through even modern times for Jewish people that are, as they're preparing for Sabbath, they cook ahead of time, they prepare ahead of time. And so preparing for a day of Sabbath, preparing for rest, I think is biblical, and it's definitely something that they should do. And in fact, I think there is something that we lose from the biblical perspective when we've shifted our view of the day being the day starts when we wake up. There's so many things, there's so many decisions we make when the sun goes down that affects the entire next day. And so thinking in terms of they would view the sundown as the beginning of the next day. And making those decisions the night before is huge. A couple things specifically to prepare, more specifically, is work smart through the week. And we talk about this in our staff culture. Work smart through the week. Be diligent through the week so you can rest. Sometimes the problem is, I've got so much to do, and there's so many things I didn't get done. And that might be because there's a lot, and sometimes you just have to say, hey, it's going to be left until the next day, or hey, I'm going to have to take a different day off, or whatever. Yeah. But it also could be because I just didn't work smart. Yeah. I just didn't get stuff done. And so what I would encourage people is work smart so you can, when you get home, you can be done. Get good, wise rhythms so that at the end of the day, you're going through, this I can pick up tomorrow. Plan out your week in a way that's wise. So you work smart so you can take the day off. Actually prepare what you're going to do on your rest. And I think sometimes we just run, work, and then, I'm exhausted, and I haven't planned my vacation well. I wait to plan my vacation until the first day of vacation. I haven't planned my vacation well. Sometimes what we do is, when we actually do have vacation, the vacation's more exhausting than our actual work. The vacation's
you need a vacation for your vacation.
And so one of the things that Rebecca and I do is, when we take a vacation, if we're traveling, we come back a day early. I need that buffer day. I don't want to come back at like driving back with the kids along, all of a sudden we get in, it's 10 p.m. and I got to be at work the next day. That's not restful. Yeah. So prepare ahead of time. Hey, I'm going to schedule out my vacation like this. Hey, you know what I'm going to do? You know what we should do as a family on this day off? We're going to do this. You know what I'm going to do? You know what would be great? I have a little bit of, couples who've got kids and they're balancing getting alone time. Maybe say, hey, how are we in this next month going to rest? Especially if now they're suddenly homeschooling. Okay, how about you take this time and you go do what you need to do, go for a run or do whatever it is. And then, I'm going to take rest on this time. And you know what? We're both going to do this together, or we're going to do this as a family. Take rest so seriously that it's not just this blank time you're wandering around feeling guilty and you end up sitting down and working again. Yeah. Prepare and plan out what you're going to do to rest. That way you can actually do things that are constructive, that are valuable, that you can make space for worship. You can turn those things that you love doing and turn them into something that's worshipful. I think those are a couple really important preparation things.
And I also think a good point to that is being really intentional, touch on your point with laziness. Rest is not just sitting there, binge watching a show or, doing nothing. It could be very intentional with what gives you life. Yes. That's very specific to you, what encourages you, what gets you ready, what fills your soul, what makes this sounds super cheesy, but what makes you smile? What are the things that kind of fill you up for the next day's work or the next week's work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the word you used there was intentional. And I think that's really, that I think is the key, because there's one activity is not inherently better than another. If there's a good, healthy show that fills your soul on Netflix that you want to binge watch, maybe that's fine, but do it intentionally. Think about it ahead of time, plan it out ahead of time. And think, hey, and so that it can be turned into something that's healthy, that is constructive, that can be actually turned into worship. When I'm on vacation, one of the things I love doing, I love putting a puzzle together. And while I'm sitting there in my khakis as a dad, using words like tutelage, I put puzzles together. And honestly, I love, Rebecca and I would talk about why is this is just so restorative. Why? Because there's so much of life that you don't see, hey, this piece fit, and then that piece fit, and that was accomplished. So one activity is not necessarily better than the other, but being intentional about it. The last thing I'll say is I think part of preparation is setting boundaries. And I think in order to rest, whether it is at night, whether it is on your day off, whether it is for vacation, set those boundaries. Set the boundaries personally, set the boundaries professionally. In other words, set the boundary for yourself. Say, hey, I am going to take, when I get home, take my phone. I'm going to put it somewhere where I'm not just seeing it and going, oh, and checking it every 10, 15 minutes. Put it away so that you can, and if you're like, hey, I've got one of those jobs, I need to be reachable. Find a solution where reachable doesn't mean tethered permanently to your phone. If you can in your business, if you're in a leadership, managerial, executive role, maybe you're a business owner or whatever, then set the boundaries professionally. Say, hey, when I am not here, this is how you reach me in the event of an emergency. But do not expect that I am going to respond until such and such a time. Set up the boundaries. If you are in a leadership role, then set the culture that is a high value of rest. It is not in someone's company's best interest to essentially not want their employees to ever rest. That is a recipe for a high turnover, because that is not biblically how humans are wired. So set boundaries personally, set boundaries professionally. There's nothing that hurts my heart more than a couple times my kids, I've been home and my daughter or my son said, hey, Dad, can you put your phone down? And as a reminder of, you know what, this is time with my kids. What am I doing?
Good.
This moment right now is a little important. Having this time with my kids that I never get back is absolutely vital, the most important thing. And it's also makes me a better pastor, it makes me a better leader, it makes me a better parent to stop and rest and make sure that I have my life in balance. So set up those intentional boundaries.
Yeah. That's so good. Wow, all of these points that we're hitting, I feel like are so good, so timely, and just help us to kind of set up our rest in a way that's worshipful, that honors the Lord, and that helps us to work better.
Absolutely.
You know, so that's really good. Robey, you did mention, just to wrap up, you did mention earlier in this podcast that in heaven we may have roles where we work, and as I'm just thinking, I think your job is going to be creating social media posts.
Social media posts?
Yeah, you're going to run heaven's Instagram.
I mean, you've seen my recent work.
Because you're so hip, and just all the new words that you'll be learning in heaven.
I'll have a word. How about my social media post will be like a word for the day. A hip word for the day will be my post.
And it's heaven, so everybody's going to think it's awesome.
They're going to love it.
You
They're
know?
gonna love it.
There's, all right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today. We hope to see you next time.
Thank you for joining us on City Rev Life. You can subscribe to this podcast, rate and review wherever you're listening to this. And we love it when you share it with your friends on social media. For more videos and content, go ahead and check us out at cityrev.org/podcast or download our City Rev Church app. Have a great day.